Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hashtag No Limits. I am your host, Shelly Kino. Hashtag No Limits is about people that society has placed limits upon, but who have busted through those limits. Ophelia says in Hamlet that we know who we are, but not what we will be. And I believe there is no better example of that than the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. And I 100% believe that we know who we are today, but we could be somebody, a completely different version of ourselves in the next breath, because we just don't know what's going to happen, positive or negative. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that caterpillar, it literally dissolves itself, reforms into the butterfly, then has to struggle to get out of the cocoon in order to be strong enough to fly. Then even when it gets out, it's not exactly ready. It has to let its wings dry, and there's this whole process. And so it's not an easy process, but neither is busting through the limits that society places upon you. And so today, even though she's a Cubs fan and I'm a Cardinals fan, I'm still very excited for you to hear Marsha's story for herself, for her children, and for her clients. And she's going to talk to us about so many different ways that she herself, her children, and her clients have busted through limits that have been placed upon them. So welcome, Marsha. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. This is really great to share with everybody, how our family has busted through many limits this year and in years past.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and get started with my story. I have two beautiful daughters, age 8. I wish it was 6. They keep growing so fast.
I know.
Age 8 and 12. Both of my children are now diagnosed with ADHD. Very different diagnoses. One is predominantly hyperactive impulsive, and the other one is predominantly inattentive. And it took us a very long time and lots of different processes to get there.
Sure.
And so about, I would say by the time my 8-year-old was 3, we had noticed that there was significant difficulties with her behavior that just at that point seemed a little bit more defined than her peers. And as an elementary education teacher, I was really in tune with what this might look like, what it might be. I had lots of different ideas, wasn't exactly sure which one it was, or how to even get started. And so we started this process by just going to see, I asked the pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, oh, well, it's developmentally appropriate at this age for children to tantrum. And I said, yes, I know, but the duration and frequency that these are happening just seems out of the ordinary for age-based peers. And so she sent us to a psychologist that was a pediatric psychologist, but she had really specialized in cognitive behavioral therapy. And after the first couple of sessions, you could see that Emily just wasn't there yet. You know, as a 3-year-old, to have that type of therapy, it's really difficult for any 3-year-old. And so, she spent the hour kind of circling around the psychologist's room, and she wouldn't sit still for her, and she wasn't interested in listening, and just was very motor active. And so she said to me, she goes, I'm not exactly sure if this is the correct therapy for her. I think she would be better served by an occupational therapist. I think she has some sensory difficulties. And I said, I'd have to agree with that. We were having a difficult time with potty training, not because she wasn't motivated. She was very motivated. That wasn't the issue. It was just, she also had a lot of sensitivities to sensory issues and things. And one of those things happened to have been an auditory sensitivity. And she really hated the sound of many loud things, including flushers on toilets, automatic flushers that, by the time she was 3-5 years ago, they were all over the place by that point. And they echoed in the bathroom. And then when she heard like the sound of the ice cream truck, most kids got so excited and they wanted to be there and they were ready to order their ice cream. And my daughter was running the other direction, avoiding the sounds of the ice cream truck and terrified, but really wanted the ice cream. But she was having a meltdown because she couldn't get there.
Right.
And I know it was very sad and disheartening. But I had shared with you previously that I really believe that a child's disability does not define who they are. That their inabilities should never be a reason that they can't do something. Exactly. And so I was determined to get her to be able to find a way to feel comfortable in doing this. So we tried music therapy to desensitize her, and we have sound, noise canceling headphones that she wears. And over the years, it has taken us a long time to get there. And every summer, it still starts off the same way. She gets so excited. She hears the sound before I do in her bedroom, and she runs to me and she's like, "Mommy, I want ice cream." And then, she, all of her friends are like, we live in a smaller town. And so where there's a school in our neighborhood. So like you could see like the kids on our street all coming out for the ice cream truck. Yeah. And here is my child at 8 years old who's still running the other way. But she's gotten there. And, right. Where before we couldn't even get her outside. She was shaking. Now she's able to get out there with her headphones. We asked the ice cream truck to please turn their music all the way down. And she's able to order for herself. And so she busted through that limit. And so that's just one way that if you teach a child to have the appropriate skills and sometimes even accommodations, because we knew when she was younger, she wasn't going to get there on her own. She didn't have that skill yet. But you really have to have the mindset that these children can grow. It doesn't matter what their disability is. They're still able to get there.
Absolutely.
Might look different, but they're absolutely able to get there. And I think I just, from my background, had that mindset because as I was growing up, I had a disability as well. I was dyslexic. I had an auditory processing delay. And even though it got diagnosed in 4th grade, I really, my parents didn't know how to get those services. And they didn't even know those services were available to them, I don't think. And so I didn't wind up getting services until I was in college.
Wow.
And I realized that, oh my gosh, I can't do any type of simultaneous processing to listen to a lecture, write down the notes, and then be able to retain that information to take a test. And
I'm going to stop you right there because that is huge, what you just said, because so many people, they don't think about how many steps are truly involved, especially at the college level, but really at any level of learning. Right. It's hearing it, it's processing it, it's doing something with that piece of information. Maybe it's writing it down, like you said, if you're in the probably middle school and on up, and then being able to retain it and possibly then spit it back out in some way immediately or form a question of, I don't understand this. Many people don't even know that they don't know to know to ask a question.
Right.
And it doesn't come until later when they're looking over their notes or they're re-listening to the lecture, whatever, accommodation they've defined for themselves, that they realize, oh, I wished I would have asked this question. Now I don't have access to the teacher or the professor or the lecturer, or, whatever it is. And so that is so key, is to realize how many steps are really involved. And I wanted to comment also about your daughter with the ice cream truck. Accommodations are provided to give access. And you figured that out beautifully with the headphones and reaching out to the driver or the company of the ice cream truck and saying, could you please do this? And you didn't do anything. I mean, you did something different, but all you did in that whole thing was to provide access.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't ask him to stop coming, because then nobody would have had access.
Right.
So asking the driver to turn the music all the way down, waiting, and I'm presuming you waited until most of the other kids were gone, or at least, that he had an opportunity to get their attention.
Right.
And then he turned it down. So again, it's just giving that access. And I've never heard of that example. And that's just so awesome, because giving her those independent skills of still being able to go and be like the other kids and run out with the excitement and be able to order whatever she wanted off the ice cream truck, like all the other kids in her neighborhood.
Right. And so I think a lot of that then translates to what happened when she got into, we're talking about preparing children, right, for the future. For especially when it comes to IDEA, we're talking about preparing children for future education, employment, and independent living. Mm-hmm. And this is a skill that she needs. She's going to have to be able to figure out how to navigate society and go out and do these types of things.
Right.
And for me, the most important thing was to give her some sort of accommodation or skill set, or we call it a toolbox, whether it's actually a box or just a set of things that she can use in these types of situations. And so I did something that most people wouldn't have necessarily done. And I actually stopped teaching. I stopped my career when she was 3. I put it on pause because I knew that there was no way that I could be 100%. And I am like one of those people who give 110% to whatever it is that I'm doing. And so I couldn't give 110% to the kids in my classroom and 110% to my kids at home. I just couldn't do it at the same time, especially with the needs that she had. And so we were fortunate that my husband was able to provide for us, in that we found a way to make it work. It wasn't comfortable at first, but we found a way to make it work because it was in the best interest of our children. And because of that, she at least went into kindergarten. I thought, oh my gosh, if I could just get her ready for kindergarten. And it wasn't reading, and it wasn't writing, and it wasn't math. It was these executive functioning skills that she needed, and these sensory skills and accommodations, so that she understood what she needed to do when she got into this larger environment. And she was still in preschool. It's not like I completely pulled her out of school during that time. She still was integrated into preschool. And of course, the preschool, which was good practice, they only had automatic flushers as well.
Yeah.
And so does her school. There is not one toilet that is not an automatic flusher at her school.
Wow.
And in all the schools that she's in, they're all like that. They're newer buildings, and they just decided that, for sanitary purposes, let's be realistic. So we don't remember to flush the toilet. For sanitary purposes, it's easier to just have it flushed for you.
Right.
And so I thought, well, if I could just give her this skill set, if she at least had some sort of working bank, then when we get into the school system, she'd be able to, we'd be able to work it out with them, and figure out how we could best provide for her to access everything. And I would say overall, that process has been a little challenging. Our school district, it's not that they, and I think it's really, we have to be careful. It's not that they don't want what's best for the children. It's just that they can't always see it the way that other people do.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, because it does. And that's why you have a team. when you're talking about a child with an IEP, an individualized education program, for anybody who may not know what that is, and you mentioned IDEA, so that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's that federal law. So to have this whole team of people, because, even though you're a Cubs fan and I'm a Cardinals fan, we're going to see the baseball game differently. Mm-hmm. But there could be things about the baseball game that we could both improve upon because of your perspective versus my perspective, or the other way around. And it's, when you have more eyes and ears looking and thinking about something, you can come up with different approaches. Almost every time I do #NoLimits, or even my Friday with Fran, or when I was interviewing people for my book, there were so many things that I thought, oh, I didn't think of it like that before. Mm-hmm. Now I can maybe use that information for another student that I work with, right. Or, help out another family because, oh, that was a great accommodation, or that was a great way to approach it, or, whatever. And so, yeah, when you can have a team of people, mm-hmm. and everyone is open to hearing the ideas that are being shared, not that somebody's ideas are bad, but maybe someone else's just seems more appropriate for the student.
Right. Right. And I think that sometimes when you're talking about busting through limits, as a parent, I had to push in a way that was appropriate because they didn't always see things the way I did. And I would say that I'm an out of the box thinker. And I want to know, what's a way that we can get this accomplished? I hear what you're saying. I hear how this is difficult, and I appreciate that. But what can we do about that? How can we make this easier on the staff? And how can, as a parent and as a fellow educator, how can I help you? Is there something that I can take on to take that off of your plate? Can I make the communication plan? Can I make this chart for you?
That's awesome.
And so, that ability, not everybody has that. And that's why we're here, right? As IEP consultants, master IEP coaches, which I'm also part of that as well.
Yep.
That's why we're here. We're here to help people because we have that background, and we, in order for anything to change, we have to raise voices. And it doesn't mean that we need to shout from the rafters. Sometimes we do, but we have to raise awareness and understanding and respect. Yeah. And that's really what it is. I think that respect is something that a lot of school districts don't put a lot of emphasis on when it comes to the parent's perspective. They don't think that it's as important because parents aren't at school with the kids all day. They don't understand how they function as learners, and that's not always the case.
You're right.
Kids are learning all day long. They just don't learn academic things. They're learning at home. They're cutting early. If you have scissors in your house, you're teaching your kids how to cut at an early age if you give them access to that. And so they're learning all day long. They're like little sponges. They are.
Exactly.
All kids.
Yep,
and even adults. We all learn from each other if we are provided the experience to access it.
Yep.
And the tools to access it. And so, and for Emily, things are complex. She not only has ADHD, which we just got diagnosed this December during the pandemic.
Wow. That's an amazing accomplishment.
It is. And I really was, when March hit, I was right on the cusp of starting that process.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, well, it's going to be really hard during the pandemic. It'll just be a little bit. We'll just wait a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And then because the way that our district worked, we didn't do any type of, they did remote learning last year, but it wasn't live. It was all asynchronous. And so the parents, she was a first grader. And so I had to spend time every day teaching her. They'd give us the lessons essentially, and the parents had to sit down with them and complete and turn in through a platform all of their work. And so as we were doing this, here's my child, we gave her a therapy ball on top of a Frisbee.
Okay.
And so that she couldn't, roll around.
Right. Right.
And here she is. She figured it out real fast how to get off that Frisbee. And she moved the Frisbee to the side, and she was literally rolling underneath the desk the whole entire time. Or she wasn't sitting still, or, she was always moving. But
Right.
she was still learning. Nonetheless,
Right.
she was just always active. And so then I started to think, wow, what's going on at school when she's learning?
Right.
And having that conversation with her teacher. And her teacher says to me, she said, oh, because Emily, fortunately, because my husband and I are both educators, he's on the admin end and I'm a teacher, and I have a background in psychology as well. We knew what to ask for before she got there.
Mm-hmm.
And she was tested for early childhood twice. First time didn't pass, or first time passed, I should say, and then second time got accepted. But she got accepted as an at-risk child. And so she was on the waiting list and didn't get in.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
And so because she didn't have an IEP or 504 or services that she needed. And so I was like, okay. But that wasn't our fault. We did what we needed to do to make sure that she was prepared. The district just didn't have a spot for her at that time, which we understood. She was doing well where she was. So other than, her needing some sensory stuff and some toileting help, she really didn't need to be there.
Right.
And it was what they called a mixed classroom. And but we showed up at the meeting before a transition meeting and a medical care plan meeting before the school year started, and they took that meeting. We had no idea. We didn't even know we were coming into a 504 meeting.
Oh.
Yes. They didn't tell us ahead of time, and they just gave us the paperwork, and they said, okay, can you sign this that we didn't give you 10 days notice? And I mean, we had all of our stuff. And then the principal even said, wow, you could run this meeting. You know exactly what she needs. We appreciate that. And so they just took that as the meeting. And so,
wow.
Yeah. And so she had her 504 by the time she came in. And so when I asked her first grade teacher last year in March, does she exhibit these same symptoms at school? And is she an active child? Her response was, well, no, not really. She has her wobble stool and her TheraBand on her chair. And I said, well, is she using that for activity purposes? Because she can't calm her body? Yeah. And then she said, and she has her calm space in the classroom and her sensory space outside the classroom. Is she using those? Yes. And I said, so approximately how many breaks is she asking for during the day? With her and she also had a bathrooming schedule. And so it turned out it was 9 to 11 times during the day that she was outside the classroom. And I thought, and you're telling me she's not active or has some issues that we need to look into? Oh. She just didn't see it because she already had everything she needed.
Right, exactly, because of the 504 accommodations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's so interesting because we sometimes unintentionally that happens,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just the normal and we don't think about, oh, well, if all of these things weren't in place, what would this child be like?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we want accommodations to do. We want that access. We want it to be the normal, But I'm going to let you continue with the story because there's a reason it's important to separate those things.
Yeah. So, so anyhow, I decided that the pandemic was going on too long. And this is something that we really needed to get accomplished, because we were just having such a difficult time, pulling out, like, is the toilet training because she has some sensory issues? Is the toilet training because it's a medical issue? Is the toilet training because at 7, your child should be toilet trained for the most part, and should be able to stay dry. And so she just wasn't at that point. I mean, we were still using pull-ups when she wasn't in school. And she had several changes of clothes that she kept in a backpack with her. We had everything figured out, but she still had all these lagging skills. And because she presented as a very rigid and inflexible child, and she had all these sensory sensitivities, we didn't know what we were heading into.
Right.
And we couldn't figure out, like, we're not we don't diagnose as parents.
Right, exactly.
Background. And so we could assume, like, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, but we didn't know. Mm-hmm. And so we put her in for a neuropsych evaluation. We're very fortunate. We're one of the few people who have insurance that cover it at 100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are very blessed. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we were very blessed. And so we put her in for the neuropsych, and they do it a really interesting way where we were. We kind of wanted it to be broken up over sessions, mm-hmm. and they refused to do that. They wanted to see what she was capable of sustaining. And so she had 6 hours of testing with breaks. She had a mask break, and she had a lunch break, and she was able to use she had bathroom breaks in there. Mm-hmm. So there were several breaks. But they wanted to be able to see what she was capable of doing over an extended period of time. Because for Emily, it's really when things build up that the outbursts occur. Mm-hmm. And so they wouldn't have been able to see that if we didn't have her there for an extended period of time. Yeah. Now, in true Emily fashion, she decided that she was going to, because she also has generalized anxiety disorder. Yes. She's a complicated kiddo. We call her our spirited one because it's the best way to describe her. She has a lot of spirit, and she's a funny, empathetic kid. But she keeps us on our toes. And so anyhow, she just wanted to get over with. I mean, she wanted to go on to the next task. Right. So it didn't matter. And she's bright. And so all of her testing came out great, but she couldn't sustain the mental focus. Right. And so that's really where it came out. And it's interesting to me, just as I have a bachelor's in psychology too. And it was interesting to me to see how they were able to flush that out in that environment without making her break down.
Yeah, that is very cool.
Yeah. And so some of the testing that they did just brought that out naturally. And so that was really neat for me to see. So story goes on. When we get back from the neuropsych testing, or I go to the results meeting with the clinician, he tells me that she didn't qualify for an autism diagnosis, which I thought I completely understood why that was. She has really one-to-one. She doesn't have any social issues. She has great eye contact. Her vocabulary is very high. She's on topic. She just has these sensory and, she's very rigid and inflexible. And those are also characteristics of ADHD.
Right. And that's so incredibly important because oftentimes I have a feeling, and I've not obviously done any research about this because it just came up in our conversation, but I have a feeling that it's often misdiagnosed because they have such similar characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe people can't afford, or maybe it's not as important to them to know, like you said, to just pull that out and separate it out into, it's not autism, it's ADHD with this general anxiety disorder. This general anxiety disorder isn't a symptom of autism. It's a separate thing in conjunction with the ADHD.
It's a comorbidity.
Yeah. Comorbidity. That was the word I was trying to come up with. And yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And yeah, so being able to have the people to do that assessment and to have that done, I have a feeling that probably doesn't happen everywhere. And so I would be curious to know, if that does happen, and then if it was really all meted out in.
Yeah.
Whoops.
So, are we okay?
Yeah. Sorry. I just almost pulled my earphones out.
Okay. So, when I went back to talk to when I went to the results meeting about with the psychologist, at first he wasn't going to give me the raw data ahead of time. And I asked for it because I wanted to see. He's like, well, the data doesn't always tell everything, the whole story. And I said, you're absolutely right. But I at least need to know where we're heading.
Right. And for you specifically, with a degree in psychology, you probably had some background and could understand a lot of that information, where your typical person not with that background would necessarily understand all of that.
Yeah. And so so I was like, okay, great, this is good. And so I said to him, I said, because he knew my background. And so he said, are there any other accommodations that you want? Anything else that you want me? Because he didn't write the report ahead of time. He wanted parent input for the report.
That's awesome.
Which is phenomenal that he was willing to collaborate.
Right.
Not everybody's, we were fortunate that we lucked out that that's his philosophy.
Yeah.
And so I said to him, I said, yes, can you please put in there that she needs an IEP for executive functioning skills? And I said, because right now she has all these accommodations which make school successful for her, but she's not learning any skills to decrease the number of accommodations that she has. Because by this point, she had over 45 accommodations.
Wow.
Between her generalized anxiety disorder, which was diagnosed at age 3. That's how we got her the 504. She had, she had a qualifying condition. And then she had a medical diagnosis of a slow generalized delay in her large colon and unspecified urinary incontinence. And she had all these diagnoses.
My goodness. Yeah.
And so she had, I'm not kidding you, 45 accommodations. And I was like, okay, we really need to step back and we need to see, what can the school district provide for her through an individualized education plan that a 504 is not already doing.
Right.
And the 504 wasn't providing the skill set. She wasn't making progress. The number of accommodations were increasing instead of decreasing.
Wow.
And the social worker began by just supporting her a small amount and then wound up supporting her a large amount by the end of this year. And awesome. Emily was back in school 4 days a week by February, and she was back in school 5 days a week by April. And so there was enough time by the time that we met for her IEP evaluation results to see if she qualified for special education services, we knew she qualified for the related services.
Right.
But in order to get those related services, she had to also qualify for special education services. And we really had to collect a lot of data on our end as parents, because because of the pandemic, they weren't able to collect all the data that they needed, not because the kids weren't there, but because the staff were being utilized for other purposes.
Gotcha.
They couldn't collect enough data on her bathrooming and the times and how long she was outside of the classroom for and what those looked like. They couldn't collect all that data consistently because the staff, our school did not have a nurse there. Mm-hmm. They have a health clerk, and the health clerk is also secretary. And so if they had to move a classroom because a child got sent home with symptoms, that took all of those people away from being able to collect that data.
Right.
And so it was just the situation that we were in.
Right.
And so I said, and once we started doing this, and she also had a check-in, check-out system created for emotional regulation, I was able to track how many accidents she had by what she was coming home wearing and what was in her backpack. And then also I was able to track what type of emotions she was feeling at school, whether it was, and we just separated them. And this is probably not the most, appropriate categories to separate them in, but negative versus positive emotions, right? Mm-hmm. That was the only way that we could think of separating them.
Sure.
And so, because sometimes it's the big emotions, but one of her big emotions might be happy or excited. And that's a big emotion for her because it causes her to become dysregulated. And so, but for their purposes, I wanted them to see like negative versus positive emotions. And so 50% of those sheets had negative emotions on.
Wow.
And to me, that was significant that she was having this impact still at school. And she's an internalizer. Unless these emotions build, she will not have an outburst at school. And the kids who are externalizers, a lot of times they receive services quickly because it's apparent.
Right, exactly.
And
squeaky wheel gets the grease. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so they were able to see it right away and with those kids. And it takes a really keen eye, I guess would be the best way to describe it, to see what's going on with Emily.
Yeah.
And so, when we're talking about educational performance and how, and that's not really defined by the law. And it just says educational performance. There needs to be impact in educational performance. Well, educational performance can be broken down into two categories: academic performance and functional performance. Academically, Emily is a strong kid. She's smart, and she'll complete her work super fast to get on to the next thing because she can have a break then. But without those breaks, she would be a mess.
Right.
And so they were saying, oh, well, she's performing really well. And yes, academically, you're right. She is. She's a bright kid. She's got it. It's in there.
Right.
But she couldn't perform that without those accommodations.
Right.
And so we need to be able to give her that skill set. And it took 6 hours of negotiating to get there and getting lots of people involved. And even though I am a master IEP coach, I brought her therapist to the meeting the second time.
Absolutely.
Her outside therapist, because I wanted them to realize that these are the issues that are going on, and Emily's talking about them with her, and Emily's talking with them about us. It's not just us, because sometimes they, I'm not going to say that they go in thinking this, but sometimes there's doubt. And and what the parents are saying, that, some parents might go in just wanting services because they think that that's what their child needs. And so they might overemphasize certain parts of things that their child is saying for that. And we're not those people, but, the districts need to protect themselves. And so they, they just have that philosophy. So we need some support.
And what you said that is so important and so key is you collected a lot of data. Mm-hmm. And data takes the emotions out.
Right.
Because it's black and white. We did this and this was the result. She did this many times out of this many times. We saw this many times out of this many times. And it takes I think this is what they need, or I think they're doing okay, or she is functioning, or she's academically okay. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, like you said, our jobs in the special education world, and I'm a former special education teacher, is to, when we write these IEPs, is to prepare them for further. So that's the word that often I think is overlooked. Mm-hmm. And it's not just further education, it's and for employment and for independent living. Mm-hmm. None of those three terms are defined beyond. And so there's a whole multitude of what all of those could look like.
Right.
And we so often only think it's for while they're in school. Mm-hmm. And it's not. Mm-hmm. We are always, and we do this with our general education students. That is what the whole education system is built for.
Right.
Is you are preparing these students to go out into the world. Well, we're doing that. We have to do that with our students with IEPs, but more specifically. But for some reason, that more specifically and still doing that same concept is often lost between gen ed and special ed.
I think that that's because there's a push down effect from the, federally, mm-hmm. what is required by the time a student exits.
Yep.
And those are based on Common Core standards. The Common Core are only in the content areas. And in Illinois, we are very fortunate that we have social emotional standards as well. And that is how we got her qualified.
Yeah. And it's not often that I hear, I'm so glad we're in Illinois.
I know.
We're so fortunate in Illinois. And so to have that, and even though I'm a Cardinals fan, which they're in Missouri, I'm still an Illinois resident. Mm-hmm. And so to know that, we did something a little bit right compared to, some of the other states is really encouraging. But yeah, for those who live in a state where maybe your state doesn't have those social emotional standards, that still doesn't exempt your district from having to provide that service. Correct. If that's what's appropriate for your child.
Correct. So she wasn't accessing those standards. And that's where we finally were able to say, hey, look, this is what's going on. It's not about collecting the data, which they thought it was, because we do need data to show, but it was really about teaching her the skill set necessary to decrease some of these accommodations. By the time she gets to high school, you're not going to want her leaving the classroom, right. That many times. She doesn't right. have the opportunity. Lessons are short. You're only there for a certain amount of time in each class. And you also have this stigmatism from her peers. She has accidents. She's not able to control her emotions. She wears AFOs, which I can never remember what it stands for, but it's the orthotic that goes all the way up your calf.
Yeah.
And she has those because she also has she has hypermobility spectrum disorder.
Oh, goodness.
And her joints go all the way back.
Oh, gotcha.
And so it wasn't so she could learn how to walk. It was because she needed to learn how to stand appropriately so that she didn't continue to place pressure on her joints.
Right.
And one of the things that we actually got the school to do through this IEP is for 3 years now. She's been an outside OT since she was 3. But for 3 years now, she's had OT consults through her 504. Mm-hmm. And I kept saying, could you please look at her pencil grip? Right? She was complaining about handwriting because she doesn't possess the ability to feel how hard she is pressing until she's done, and then her hand hurts and it's tired and she can't, it fatigues.
Right.
And so they actually left that out of her evaluation when we had to ask them to do it. So they did it the day before or the day of. And it was a miscommunication because they had to add it into the domain after the domain was already completed. And
I'm going to pause you there because not every state calls it a domain, but it's that. So just to describe that, it's when they're determining what information is needed when you're doing an evaluation. In Illinois, we call those domains. I'm not exactly sure what they're called everywhere, but it's just basically you have a meeting or you talk about, okay, this is what we know. This is what we want to know. Where are we going to get that information?
Mm-hmm. And so when we had that meeting, we didn't even have a domains meeting, actually. We had a meeting to discuss them not following a portion of our 504. And it was at that meeting when we discussed the neuropsychologist's recommendations for an IEP that they, at the very end, determined that they were going to do this. And then there was no time left for the domain meeting. And so they sent us the domains. And then I sent it back and said, listen, could you please include this because of X, Y, and Z? And so they said yes. And so then I don't think the occupational therapist had the second domain, second set of domains.
Right.
Or the most up-to-date one. And so, anyhow, it all got resolved, but now she's getting services so that she learns, because they're like, oh, we gave her an accommodation. We gave her the accommodation. She has an egg, what's that thing called? An egg grip, an egg gripper. And now we put foam underneath her paper so she can feel, these are phenomenal accommodations. I mean, they were really good. And so, but the thing is, nobody was there to teach her how to use them.
And that is another extremely key point. And I've brought this up a lot recently, especially like the first time I go into a school district with a family. And I'll be honest, as a special education teacher, I didn't really think about this either, is, having those things clearly defined and the reason why you're doing them. And then it's our desire to not have a child have to rely on things if we can teach them, if we can find ways to teach what you're talking about, teach that skill set that was missing. And so, writing it in there that, it's going to be X number of times, and then who's going to teach that skill? Because we often will put in things like, especially for kids who have organizational issues, we'll put in accommodation of, well, they're going to have a binder and it's going to have different colors for the different subjects. That's all well and good, but if you just hand that to the child that has the and that's an executive function skill that has that organizational deficit, that's not going to help. Somebody has to teach that.
Right.
So who's going to teach that? So that's a question that needs to be discussed. And, it might need to be an objective or maybe a goal so that later it can just be an accommodation. And then hopefully eventually it's something that is taken out of the IEP because the student has learned it and is continuing to use it or has adapted it to, however they need it for themselves.
Right. And so, I really do believe that that's the goal. There are some things that children are not going to be able to not have the accommodation for. They're going to need those. But there are other things that you can't assume that they're not going to be able to do. They have to be taught it first.
Yes.
And so, there's this quote similar to your butterfly analysis, and it's teach me to soar and I will. And you really have to teach them to do that. You can't just assume that by you giving them something, they're going to be able to do this in the future on their own. And they're going to make that transfer. You have to make it intentional.
Yes.
And so, and that's even for my older daughter who's 12, and she didn't get diagnosed until this year.
Yeah. Well, and I think all the experience that you had diagnosing, getting eligibility for your younger daughter probably went, and opened some eyes to maybe the school staff and yourself and your husband as to, we need to probably be doing some things for Sophia, right? She's the older one, or she?
Sophie. Yeah.
Sophie.
We did hers backwards though. So she had the 504 first, just like Emily, and she's had that since she was in 4th grade. And finally by 4th grade, which is amazing, advocacy in children, this is like a whole nother topic, which we don't have time to get into today, is self-advocacy. But teaching them those skill sets is so important. And Emily is wonderful. She's able to say, this is my 504 and it says I need this and you need to give it to me. It's not always the most appropriate way.
Right. But again, somebody has to teach her to be appropriate with it. So
she's getting the idea that she has to speak up for herself. And so, so with Sophie, by 4th grade, she wasn't comprehending and her fluency was bad, but she was able to read whatever you gave her. But she would, she would take the beginning of I forgot what the word is, but she was taking the beginning of the word and interchanging it, there we go, with the middle of the word. And we spent all summer from 2nd grade to 3rd grade doing this intervention binder on this skill, and she just couldn't get it. And so I was like, what is going on? And I was dyslexic and I was concerned for her. And so by the time, in 4th grade, she said, I feel like I'm not hearing the information the same way at processing. It takes me longer to process, Mommy. And, and I'm just not fluent when I'm reading. And sometimes I can't figure out the words, but once she's figured out a word, she's got it. It's like in there, and she'll be able to repeat that word for however many times she needs to. And so she said, I just feel like it's taking me longer to do all these things because I can't process at the same speed. I can't do things at the same speed as my friends. And then they get aggravated with me when I'm, when we're doing reading together and it takes me longer. And so the teacher said, well, we don't see it. And I said, well, does she complain about stomach aches here at school? Yes. Is she a frequent flyer in the nurse's office because of headaches and stomach aches? Yeah. So you're telling me she's having anxiety over having to do these things here at school? Yes. And Sophie also said that so that year was the first time that they didn't have strong visuals. It was 4th grade. They were getting them ready for 5th grade, which is a different building, and they have more responsibilities there, independent responsibilities. And so they were getting ready for that transition. And so instead of the teacher, everybody having the workbook out, they were doing it up on the smart board, and it was too far away for her to listen to what the teacher was saying, look at the board, write down the answer, hold it in her working memory, which we found out she has issues with, hold it in that working memory. She just couldn't do it. And I was like, how are you getting the right answers? And she's like, oh, I I just looked at my friend's board and wrote it down real fast. And I was like, okay, well, I suppose that's one accommodation you can
Right?
try.
Yeah.
Right?
She's learning how to adjust. Yeah. Be flexible with things.
Yes. And so, anyhow, she had a speech eval that year. And it turned out that even though she was able to recall the information, it took her an extended amount of time. And it was only with cueing of the speech and language pathologist to say, okay, make a visual in your head, because she couldn't repeat the directions. Right. And once Sophie had that visual, she was able to do it. But then when she got into middle school and all those things were taken away, because that's just not what they do there, she was having a really hard time. And so, again, in the middle of the pandemic, I asked them, I said, could you please, let's have a meeting to discuss the need to see if she qualifies for special education services and what we would need to test her in. And so they did an enormous amount of testing, and they had her come in for it, which was phenomenal. They had like this glass ceiling to pour plexiglass in front of her and the evaluator, and they made it work, which I thought was great.
That's awesome.
That they were able to provide that service. It wasn't over Zoom,
right? And
it was in person. And in that report, a lot of things came up with her generalized anxiety disorder and how she wasn't able to perform when there were time tests, and also that she wasn't able to attend. And so I was like, okay, well, now we need to go to the neuropsychologist, because they, in our district, they don't do educational diagnoses of ADHD. So they only accept medical ones from outside. And so even though they said that this is something she might have, we had to go and get it diagnosed. And so, so I did that. And when I was doing that, and this is kind of how I'll wrap up. When I was doing that, and I started taking the Master IEP Coach program, the neuropsychologist said to me at her results meeting, he's like, oh my gosh, you must be a bulldog. How did you get the district to do all of these assessments and evaluations on her? This is unheard of. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I put it in writing, and I told them why we needed it and what supported it. And then they did it. And he's like, wow. He's like, not a lot of people would be able to do that. You should really look into doing this. And I said, well, I'm actually already looking into doing this. I said, I think I found my calling. And he's like, yeah, I would say so too. And so that's how I got interested and became a Master IEP Coach. And then just recently opened up my own consultation practice. So
awesome. So yeah, we just have under 2 minutes. So I want to make sure 2 things. I want you to, I know you said you wanted me to make sure that it was very clear to the audience that the no limits thing, the not setting limits, I'll let you think how you want to word that exactly. And then how can people find you?
Okay. So I think it's important with either a child or yourself to realize we do all have things that we can and can't do, but that there is always a possibility of yet. And sometimes getting to yet to, being able to do it later takes a while, and it's a process, but there's always that possibility. And so really just never give up on your dreams and what you believe in and what you believe in for your children, and keep pushing, because you are their biggest voice. You are their biggest advocate, and you know what they need, and you will find a way.
Awesome. That's beautiful. So how can people find you if they have a child that sounds very similar to one of your daughters, and they can?
Sure. Sorry about that. I thought I turned it off. So I am available on a couple different platforms. I'm available through Facebook. You can find me through Marsha Swartz. I have 2 pages. One's my personal page, and the other one is my business page. And then the second way is you can also find me through Instagram. I will come up as Marsha Swartz. And then, maybe there's 4 ways. The third way is through marshaswartz.com. And that's MARSHASWARTZ.com. A lot of people spell Schwartz the wrong way, or Marsha for that matter.
Yeah.
And then the last way is you can just email me, and you can email me at iephelp@marshaswartz.com.
Perfect. All right. So if they need help, there's lots of ways to find you. And on your website, like on my website, do you have a free item that they can get when they come to your website? So for me, it's a free IEP checklist. What is it on yours?
Absolutely. So on mine, it is a free IEP checklist as well. It's called 10 Tips for a Successful IEP.
Perfect. All right. Well, Marsha, thank you so much. And as I said at the beginning, you have an amazing story, and I'm so glad that you were able to tell it today. And again, I thank you so much. And I look forward to actually meeting you in July at the Master IEP Coach Conference. Marsha and I have never met, but we have both gone through the mentorship program. And so I'm excited to meet her in person and talk more about her story. So go Cards. See you later.
Go Cubs. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Kelly.
You're very welcome.